Hello, I'm Rit Udison, Executive and Artistic Director at the Loft Literary Center. Welcome to this live stream at Virtual Wordplay. I'm so glad you're here with us. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about what brought us here today. For the last year, the Loft staff has been working hard to put together an outdoor book festival that would have gathered 100 authors with 10,000 visitors in our neighborhood in downtown Minneapolis. As COVID-19 hit, we knew we had to think about everything we do differently, especially this festival. While we were disappointed that we wouldn't be able to gather in person, we became even more committed to supporting writers, celebrating new books, and finding new ways to assert the connective power of the written word. In a time of anxiety, we want to offer a powerful event for readers, writers, and booksellers. When we first approached our sponsors, their first question was, what is a virtual festival? And to be honest, we didn't know. Our founding partners, St. Catherine University and Star Tribune, agreed to make a leap of faith with the Loft. With courage, generosity, and vision, they have worked alongside us to figure out what this virtual festival might become. We are grateful to our sponsors and donors. Their generosity is incredible, but it is not enough. We believe it is essential, especially during a health and financial crisis, to offer programs that are free and accessible to all. But that has led to a significant revenue loss. A live event would have included ticket revenue, beer sales, exhibitor fees, and additional sponsorships. The Loft is not closed. We continue to offer classes, fellowships, conversations, support for readers and writers in addition to this festival. We are here to support the literary community, and we ask that you continue to support us. If you are able, please consider making a contribution to the Loft today. Thank you for being here.
Joining us for Loft's online wordplay event with Charles Yu. We're delighted to have him. Thank you for spending a Thursday afternoon with us. Before we get started, we have some folks to thank. We would like to, of course, thank our event sponsors, St. Catherine University and Star Tribune. We'd also like to thank partner MSP Film Society. By the way, check out the MSPIFF 39 Redefined, a virtual film festival. You can check out dates, tickets, and lineup availability soon at mspfilm.org. Again, that's mspfilm.org. And of course, it's always a good time to support independent local bookstores, but now, especially during the pandemic, they could use your support. We encourage you to buy Charles's books and other books from the link that you can see on the page, Majors and Quinn. Cool? We good? So let's just jump right into it. Good afternoon, Charles. How you doing?
All right. How are you, Bao?
I'm well, thank you. I got to say, I'm a really big fan. For those of you who are just joining us, Charles Yu's recent novel is Interior Chinatown. He does have other books out there, including How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe. And of course, he spent some time as a writer on HBO's reboot of Westworld. Charles, I'm a big fan. I've been a big fan since How to Live Safely. I was really looking forward to doing this with you live in May for Wordplay, but we're super glad that you're willing to do this virtually for the audiences around the world who are tuning in right now. The first question I have for you is about Interior Chinatown. Wonderful book, by the way. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Interior Chinatown revolves around a main character whose life revolves around a single occupancy unit in Chinatown that also doubles as a television set for a police officer procedural. It's a brilliant conceit. I love the book. And the first question I have for you really is about the reception to the book, because I've seen a lot of people kind of bring out the humor in it, and certainly it is a very funny book, but it also strikes me as a profoundly angry book, a very angry work. And it makes me wonder if culture at large in the United States they either can't see or they don't know what to do with Asian American anger.
That's a great question and loaded, and a lot of interesting things to dive in. I'll try to touch on a couple things that you brought to mind, and if one, I agree with you. I think there is an undercurrent of anger, and it's not so much an undercurrent as it's part of the, it's part of the tone of the book. Some of these, I think in a kind of soundbite age, it's easier to seize on sort of certain aspects of a story. And so the way it's told in screenplay format, the fact that it's cop procedural, the fact that there is humor, I think is an easier way into what are usually, fairly short conversations. And it, spoiler alert, it's more in the back half of the book that you start to see some of the anger that I think you're talking about. I think it's sort of backloaded. And so that might be another reason why it's like and that was somewhat intentional on my part. I didn't want to alienate people that might be coming to this book saying, I'm interested, and then immediately I start ranting at them. So, but I agree with you that there is a real sort of difficulty in balancing that, in trying to draw people towards, in this story, I'm trying to tell the story through a point of view we don't see often, which is inside an Asian American's consciousness. And so I had to think about, how do I make this person appealing in a way that, to be frank, might be a little bit of a kind of Trojan horse. I want to bring you into the story, and then I want to tell you a kind of heavier story than you might have been expecting.
Terrific. And kind of along those notes, when I had read an earlier novel of yours, How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, I actually had that same thought, because I remember reading it and thinking, okay, there's definitely something happening here, but in the early part of the book, it's very much a science fiction story, right? And then at the end, there's just this breakthrough moment when you realize this is very much an Asian American racialized immigrant story, right? That comes at the end. And so can you talk about why a little bit more, expand on why you use that strategy in your novels?
Yeah, strategy is probably giving me more credit than I deserve. I think, for better or worse, you write the story that arrives to you, and it's hard enough to sort of produce things that feel authentic. So I wish I could engineer my way into stories with that much intention, but really, I think that, to be honest, in that book, in How to Live Safely, I wanted to write this very personal father-son story, and it came out as a kind of time travel story, and I wanted to explore that, and I wanted it to feel universal, and this might be revealing of something about me, but I felt that making it an explicitly Asian American immigrant story would actually detract from the universality of it. And I had somebody sort of call me out on that. I was at a reading in Boston, and somebody actually came up to me after I read from the book and said, why are you sort of hiding from writing about the immigrant experience? Why are you, sort of a mirror image of your question, why aren't you writing about it more explicitly? And that was a kind of wake-up call for me, in that I realized, one, this element is sort of more present in the things that I think about than I had sort of admitted to myself. And two, I think it informed me in Interior Chinatown, really trying to be much more deliberate in not shying away from writing about what I really wanted to write about, which was the Asian American consciousness, and other things. I don't think the book was just about that, but I think I didn't want to be afraid in this go around and end up doing the same thing.
Absolutely, thank you for that. And it strikes me when I read Interior Chinatown, for example, that as a writer you accomplish both those things, right? That you are able to write some of these beautiful things that I think anyone could appreciate. For example, there's some stuff about romantic love that is, even though it's racialized, there are a lot of things in it that are universal to everyone. Like, there's a beautiful speech where the female protagonist tells the male protagonist what love is. It's just a beautiful passage that I think anyone could relate to. Similarly, the very funny passage with the character's daughter, where she talks about getting her toes stuck together, is like a very funny, very quirky thing that almost any parent could relate to, right? But then you follow that up with this devastating passage about how the character is worried about the racism that child is going to face when they become a child. And so to me, one thing I want you to, if you would be willing to talk about, is, there's this idea that those of us who are non-white writers, like, we get by just writing about race, right? And like, that's like some golden goose where we chase success, and that's all we have to do, and we actually don't have to have any talent. All we have to do is write about these issues. But actually, to me, that's not true. A reading works like yours and many other non-white writers, it strikes me that we actually have more work to do. Like, we actually have to have skills about writing about these things that may or may not be racial, and write skillfully about race.
Yes, I co-sign all of that. I think anybody who has tried to get something published, whether it be in a journal or a magazine or with a publishing house, and thinks that thinks that there's any kind of, that it's easy, has never really done it. Obviously, it's incredibly narrow sort of target to hit, and there are gatekeepers at many steps along the way. And so that's an insane idea. I don't even know if it's sort of worth debating, but to address your question, the idea that, to sort of twist it a little bit, is the idea that for me, it's almost the opposite. Are writers of color being put in a box when they write things, regardless of whether or not they like it? Do they then get pigeonholed as, this is Asian American fiction, or somehow this is concerned with a woman's experience or with LGBTQ experience, because I can put this label on that writer? And is it then taken less seriously than something that might have been written by, sort of the stereotypical image of capital S serious writer, which is, like a middle-aged white man who did like at Eastern University or something, right? Or something like that, that there's a certain model for a serious writer. And yes, we respect and admire this sort of ethnic or interest group fiction, but it's not in the same, it's an apples and oranges thing. I think, to me, that's more likely the struggle is that. But I'm not sure I answered your question so much as sort of danced around it.
No, I think that's exactly what I was getting at. Thank you. And while we're on the topic, could you talk a little bit about your journey to being a writer? Because from what I remember, you started off in law or business. Is that correct?
Yeah, I started out as a corporate lawyer, which is I was uniquely unsuited for, but somehow managed to find myself in like halfway into a career. So I did that for well over a decade, and I didn't mind it. I think I was passively competent at certain aspects of it, but it was not it was not my passion to practice law. I knew from the beginning that I would need a sort of outlet. And so I started writing short stories right when I sort of joined graduated from law school and started writing fiction at the same time. And in retrospect, that was probably there was something to that. I was looking for a release valve and a creative space.
Yeah. And so I think I read in another interview that your first forays into writing, there was some challenges, or you felt like there were?
Yeah, I mean, I at various times, one, the biggest challenge is I wrote a lot of stuff that sucked. So that tends to make it difficult. So I had to learn, I taught myself, as do a lot of people. I'm not saying, but I'm saying, the kind of feedback loop. I didn't have, say, an MFA or a writers group. I was living in LA, not in, a city where a writer is typically using Final Draft, not, Microsoft Word. And so I was writing fiction and kind of feeling a little bit like an alien. I didn't have anyone to share it with. And so, yeah, that was kind of tough. I wrote weird experimental stuff, which I think was another hurdle. Or I thought it was that. And then I started publishing stories, and I realized that people were sort of connecting with these things that I thought were so weird. And that was really illuminating, that the more sort of idiosyncratic, the more I leaned into what felt true, the more I could sense that people, even if they didn't love it, would respond to it, that I was saying something that was actually coming from a real place. But I guess another challenge was really just that, I had a kind of self-doubt. I think this goes back to your earlier question about whether what I was doing was serious enough, whether anyone would care. And I think that kind of legitimacy, the questioning of my own right to do this, I don't know if it's an aspect of my kind of Taiwanese American consciousness or something just particular to my head, but it's still something I struggle with, the question of whether or not anyone's going to care and, whether or not I belong at the table. It's not something that's gone away.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm speaking for myself, I think that that's something a lot of us struggle with, right? Is that we don't know if we belong, imposter syndrome, and many of those things. So thank you for sharing. Now, while we're talking about LA, can you talk a little bit about how you got involved in the writer's room with Westworld at HBO?
Yeah, so I was writing, I was working as a lawyer, I was publishing stories, and then I published a couple of books. I published the novel How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe. And after that book, I got an agent who was helping with film and TV rights. That's, not uncommon when you publish sort of a novel or a short story collection or nonfiction that sometimes people will want to option it. So at first I was working with these agents who were, super excited about it. I was super excited. I was like, oh, Hollywood. But they were also really sort of, far-sighted about it. And they said, you might want to do this someday. So let's start having you meet people in LA that, basically development executives at TV and film companies, that where it's the thing you do. You go and you sit on a couch and you meet someone for an hour and you drink a bottle of water and you kind of get to know each other. And you're like, what was that about? Like, I don't know why I met that person. But it turns out those meetings do, form the kind of basis for starting to kind of make my way into this field. And I met an executive at HBO named David Levine, and we kind of kept in touch. And then I'm working, still working as a lawyer, like maybe a year or more later after that meeting, I get a call from, my agent saying, do you want to go meet on this show called Westworld? And I was like, it just didn't seem real. And I was like, how did that happen? And I realized it must have been that through that meeting with David, I kind of got put on a list of people. Here are people you might want to meet. So I met the showrunners, Jonah Nolan and Lisa Joy, and they are, really, really smart people, and also were interested in constructing a writer's room that had a lot of different kinds of voices, including apparently like they wanted, some novelists or fiction writers. And so I was lucky enough to get hired onto the staff of that show for the first season.
Great. Thank you. And, I was, when I started watching the reboot of Westworld, I was really thrilled to see your name. And, I don't want to make too many assumptions here, but I'm also assuming that the Asian American characters on that show that had some depth to them, I just kind of attributed that to you. And you don't have to say if that's really you or not. Just take the credit. No one will know. But I've continued watching, and in the recent seasons, that now that you're no longer with the show and in the writers' room, especially the last season, the representation of Asian characters leaves a lot to be desired. And I don't want to pick on them too much, but I know that a while ago you were also asked to comment on, the portrayal of Bruce Lee, for example, in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which was a kind of controversial. And so I'm wondering if you could just, maybe you can talk as specifically or as broadly as you want to about how you feel about representation and of Asian and Asian American people in Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I probably can't take any specific credit for any depth on the show, other than I was probably the nerdiest person on the staff about certain aspects of like consciousness and like AI. I mean, the showrunners clearly they have done a ton of research and reading. So, but other than that, I felt like as the novelist who was brought in as this like meta science fiction guy, I should probably read up on a lot of that stuff. So I did. But the thing in TV is it is a bit of a sausage making facility, and so it's hard to know what parts of your ground meat went into the final product. I mean, you can kind of see it in the marbled sausage that appears on your screen, but it's very hard to attribute any particular thing to one person other than the showrunners. I think that the thing about having representation in the room, in the writer's room, or behind the camera, or in front of the camera, is that there are certain aspects of experience that are very hard, despite best intentions, to make feel authentically lived and make you really sort of believe it, unless it's coming from play. Which is not to say that it has to be one-to-one, that an Asian American showrunner has to create a show if the protagonist is Asian American, or that you need a Latinx writer to write for the Latinx character. That's definitely not how TV works, and I don't think that's how fiction works, right? But it's the conversation and the dialogue and the kind of accountability that presence creates, where it's like you can't get too far off into crazy land if you have somebody who's keeping it real inside the room. Like, I don't know, guys, like this doesn't match with anything I've ever experienced in my life. I have had the good fortune of having showrunners and other writers who, and this could be a product of living in the LA bubble, who for the most part have only the best intentions. That doesn't always mean the product always, comes out reflecting those intentions. Clearly there are times where you're like, ooh, how did that happen? But I think people generally have really good intentions in the rooms I've been in. That said, the Bruce Lee thing and other examples where I've cringed or I've thought, I just don't, that doesn't sit right, is usually a product of, the thing that my book is really about, which is humanizing the point of view of somebody who's typically not a dimensional character. We have a default of like, certain kinds of default. Men tend to be the default. Attractive people are the default. White people tend to be the default in these mass media products still. And that's fine. Those are all obviously important groups of people, but they are plenty represented. And if this coronavirus, and the attacks on Asian Americans has shown anything, it's that it's very important to make sure that other groups are humanized. I mean, Asian Americans are Asian Americans, full stop, right? They're Americans, full stop, is what I mean to say. And yet in this crisis, we're seeing how quickly that gets flattened into, that's an Asian person, I'm going to attack that Asian person, or this is their fault. The sort of emerging reports about how it's affecting different racial groups, disproportionately, is just, I think it's the beginning of a very big story. And it just goes to show that it's like when you sort of lose that specificity in how you think and talk about people, you degrade the quality of the conversation. That was a lot of words. I don't even know.
No, that was actually perfect. That's a brilliant segue into my last question. Going back to Interior Chinatown, which is, again, your latest book, what I admired so much about it is that you take these characters, again, not just Asian American, but also like the background characters that would be on a television show, right? Like generic Asian number two, Kung Fu Asian guy, dragon lady, hostess, waitress at a restaurant. You take these characters that people see every day and don't give like a single second thought to, and you humanize them brilliantly. And in our current day and age, where as you mentioned, anyone who presents as Asian is being vilified and demonized. It's just admirable. And I'm wondering going back to your writing process in the book, if you could go into like how you were able to do that with these, to humanize so well, like the interior lives of these characters that a lot of people would take for granted.
Yeah, I think it's probably a lifetime spent, to go a little bit back to what we were talking about, of in this space of kind of self-doubt, always feeling a little bit at the margin. And I think it's a great place for a writer to be. I think it's probably an essential quality of a writer, the ability to view things from that perspective. And I did want to write specifically from this perspective of Willis Wu, the protagonist, because I don't think we've seen the subjective reality for an Asian American male that often in novels. And I mean, we see characters, but we see them from the outside as surfaces. And, part of me wrestled with, is this, I actually even got some early feedback saying, is this really like, not from like my editors or agents who were all very supportive. I'm saying, like, when I was first reading some of the early like kind of comments about the book, it's like, is this really a problem that there's not enough Asians on TV? But I mean, I think if anything, sadly, the racist response to this pandemic has been validation that it is important, and that when you see something on screen all the time, it tells you this is what your reality is. It can't help but have a pretty distorting effect on who you care about and what you care about and whose eyes you see the world through. And yeah, I don't know, for whatever reason, it's just a natural thing for me, both from my parents, who are, to a lot of Americans, they're these old Asian people. But like, my parents have lived in the US for almost 60 years. Like, they're pretty American. They've lived here twice as long as, well, not twice as long, but they've lived here much longer than I have, because, they moved here years before I was born. So they're, in that way, they're more American than I am, I guess. And yeah, I guess I really wanted to make sure I kept an eye on that and was able to write from the marginal perspective.
Thank you for that. I think you definitely succeeded. I love the book. Again, thank you so much for writing it. I feel like it's a book, again, as an Asian American man, I think you're absolutely right. And I appreciated your book so much. I feel like your book and Kathy Park Hong's newest book, I've waited like 2 decades to read books like yours. So thank you for writing it. Those of you who are watching, I highly encourage you to buy Charles's book, both Interior Chinatown and his older work, including How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe. Brilliant stuff. Please pick them up. Support Majors and Quinn by clicking that link. Of course, the Loft is also accepting donations. So, feel free to donate. And at this point, we're not quite done yet. I'm going to hand it over to the Loft's very own Rachel Yang. Yang Deasy is going to start facilitating questions from any of our viewers directly for Charles.
Yang Deasy.
All right. I have never gone by that name before, but I'm happy to today. We have a few questions from our audience. And the first one is from Lois, who asks, what is the difference between the creative community and entertainment writing versus books? And which one do you like better?
Ooh. You're asking me to declare my allegiance, and one of the gangs will then proceed to beat me up. I'm able to walk on the street. Well, I mean, it's pretty easy for me. I love the world of books. TV is an incredible opportunity, and I'm excited to have it, and also it pays my bills and my family's bills, so that's also great. But my first love is has been and always will be. I don't know that I have that much of like a books community. Like I don't have a bunch of writers that I share things with, or so it's like events like this that make me super excited, because it's when I actually go, oh yeah, people are reading, people are writing, I'm reading other people's books, they're reading mine, if I'm lucky. And nothing replaces that feeling. I wish I could have gone to Minneapolis, because I'm always like on a high. I mean, this will be a high, but it'll last until like lunch, because it's like, but still, it's pretty irreplaceable. But so it's 1A and 1B. It's hard to choose.
Sure. Yeah, we would have loved to have you here in person, but glad that we can still have this kind of creative community virtually. We have another question. This one is from Dina, who asks, when you're writing, what percentage is misery versus joy? And what is your favorite and least favorite process when you're beginning a new project?
Oh, 99% misery, 1% joy.
Kind of a twofer there.
Yeah, it's a twofer. Or it's sort of like there's, even in the misery, there's a seed of the joy. Not always, but it's always a little bit hard to separate, because sometimes it's the kind of misery where the only good kind of misery, I guess, is when it's miserable because you know that there's something real to be dug out of there, and it's going to take a lot of work and you might mess it up. But that's the only time it really matters. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if there isn't misery, if it's just like a blank slate, that's pretty terrible, actually. That's just like anxiety. So they're sort of stuck together. What was the other part of the question, Rachel? The second.
The last part of that was, what's your favorite and least favorite process when you're starting a new project?
Well, I know what it is I know what it is in TV, which is I love coming up with a concept for something. I don't like executing concepts. I just like concepts. So if like there were a job where I could just write a bunch of concepts and someone would pay me for that, then I would definitely do that. Like, we're buying concepts today and TV sort of is like that, except for then they want you to actually figure out how it would be a show. But yeah, I just love new ideas more than anything.
Cool. Can definitely relate. Those details can kind of bog me down as well. Another question. This one is from Steph, who asks, what writers or books do you see your work in conversation with?
Ooh, well, this is a very, I wanted to say this before, and I'm glad Bao said it. When I saw that Kathy Park Hong was about to publish a book called Minor Feelings, I almost couldn't believe how close together the books were going to be published, because I felt like they were actually in conversation. I've never met her. I was like, wow, how come we're not having an actual real life conversation? So that was really exciting. In terms of other works, I mean, I don't know. I think I know sort of like who I love to read, and I know who I admire, but I'm not sure. I always just sort of feel like I'm shouting into the void. But I would like to meet Kathy Park Hong someday.
Definitely not shouting into the void. There are a lot of people in here who are super thrilled and leaving really excited comments that you're doing this event with us. So I can assure you the void is shouting back.
Well, good. Thanks.
Let's see. Savannah asks what your experience finding an agent was like.
It was stressful, and I felt like, am I ever going to get someone, I had flashbacks of like asking someone to the winter formal, like, will anyone ever love me? And it just takes one. That's one thing. But so I had a couple of agents contact me after I started publishing short stories. I published a story in the Gettysburg Review. I remember how excited I was. And I had an agent, or actually I had an editor reach out after that. And so I realized, people are reading these stories. I didn't think I would publish a book anytime soon, but I thought maybe it's a possibility. Eventually I had an agent reach out after another story, and so we ended up working together. So that was pretty great. But over the years, I had submitted queries and just gotten, a lot of rejections and a couple of like, oh, it's a close call, which is almost worse in some ways. I don't know. It's a pretty typical story, I guess. The idea, I think, for me back then was like an agent will validate whether or not I'm a real writer, But the thing is that those goalposts keep moving. I can tell you, 4 books in, those goalposts don't stop moving for me anyway. So you're a real writer that you feel are real, but that's probably not helpful for someone who's actually looking for an agent. I think if I want to be a little helpful, the agents that my agent now, Julie Bear, is incredible. And I've known her for years through email anyway. She was passionate about my work very early on. And I think that's the only important thing. You can't have 10 agents. You don't need a super powerful agent to like constantly shower praise on you. You need someone who passionately loves your work and will make your work better. And I think that's true of an editor too. And actually, one person is all you can have for that, really. So.
Cool. E is wondering what topics or situations you see appearing more or becoming more popular in sci-fi and speculative fiction, or in film and TV.
I guess since late 2016, there's definitely been a lot of sci-fi and speculative fiction that feels like this is a very powerful way of telling stories in an age where fiction can and should and is political. I think that's something that I've and I think part of that is also lots of stories being told from a point of view that you haven't necessarily seen in speculative fiction, or you've seen, but maybe are getting a lot more notice now. And I think in TV, and specifically since I work in it, and a willingness to experiment with form. I think TV is actually very open to formal innovation and interested in telling stories in ways that play with structure. That was it. I usually talk more than that, but now I'm just gonna. I was like, I did my quota of words.
Cool. Let's see. Here's one from ED who asks, how much of Interior Chinatown was influenced by your time in Hollywood and specifically working on Westworld? I noticed similar themes such as with multiple roles and character loops, but wasn't sure if I was reading too much into it.
Yeah, some of that is definitely, I only notice it in retrospect, usually with a little bit of embarrassment, because it's like, uh-oh, am I either ripping off or not really ripping off, but am I unduly influenced by something? It's natural though, right? I mean, I spent many, many months in the Westworld writer's room and I learned a lot. I think sometimes the effect is, it's not to say that's not positive, but I think sometimes it's a reaction to environment. So being constrained by other people's voices is something that, as a fiction writer, then I get to go away for a while and say, I don't want to write in your voice anymore. I did that. Now I want to write something in my own voice. So, but on the flip side, I think, yeah, there's definitely thinking about roles, thinking about, a kind of cyclical reality, thinking about being constrained in what kinds of narratives that you're allowed to have. There was definitely influence. Yeah, I'm indebted to them for that, for sure.
We have a few other questions too, kind of about the comparison between writing for television versus writing a novel. So a couple of questions on that are, how do you outline for a novel versus for TV? And we had another question just kind of broadly asking about what is the leap from writing fiction to writing for entertainment look like as a creative process?
The first question was about outlining. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been in 6 writers' rooms, and I've seen 6 different styles for how people write TV, which is to say that it doesn't vary as much as I'm sure 6 fiction writers would have more variation. There is a kind of process in TV. You have to actually make a show that is airable, but different showrunners are like different, writers in that way that they, some like very little outlining. They'll give you only kind of the most sort of skeletal of elements and say, go and find it on the page. Other showrunners will give you, for a 60-page script, a 15-page single-spaced outline where you are pretty much constrained. You're on rails in terms of what you're allowed to do with the story. If you're going to make a discovery, it's going to be on a smaller scale. It'll be a dialogue, kind of some clever bit of dialogue or some other little innovation that you might be able to add, but you're mostly just trying to color in the lines in the best possible way. Which is not to say that's still not a creative thing. There's still creativity to be done to turn a 15-page outline to a 60-page script, but you don't have nearly as much freedom as any fiction writer would have. I'm not a outliner in fiction in general. I'll usually get to a point, though, if I'm writing something longer than, anything longer than like 10 pages, where I'll have to sit down and go, wait, what am I doing? And then I'll have to diagram. Like, I'm confused, and so I'll have to actually do some form of outlining after the fact, or I'm like, what am I trying to get to here? I'm more of a kind of, it's happening and I don't know what's happening and I feel like nothing's happening, and then my subconscious is actually working out the outline without me knowing it. There was a second, the leap from fiction to TV. Was that the question? Like how do you make
Yep.
it, or?
Yeah, what was it like being an author and making the leap into writing for television, and what do you like about either form? Which maybe you answered a bit there anyway.
Yeah, I guess the one thing is, it took me a while to realize people didn't care that much about my prose. I would write bits of prose into a script and they'd just be like, well, we can't film that. That's a nice poem, but like nobody can, that's not a shot from a camera. So, or it's not something someone says or does. So, not to say that there's no room for creativity on the page. There is, but it's a different kind. You have to think in a visual medium. And that's forced me to think, there's a kind of clarity that you, for better or worse. In fiction, I think there's, a room for ambiguity, designed ambiguity or unintentional ambiguity that adds to the richness of what you're reading. Harder to pull that off in TV, for sure. Maybe like some brilliant film director could pull it off, but that's usually because it's someone she's got a vision and she can film it and she can write it and film it herself. But when you have 150 people who are depending on, a script, you have to be clear in a way that you don't always want to be clear as a novelist. So that took some learning. On the other hand, it's, screenwriting has helped me diagnose some of my problems earlier in terms of like structure or clarity or logic.
Okay. I think we'll do one more, and then Bao, I think, will close us out either with just one last question, I think, or a few closing words. But a last question from Emma is, in Interior Chinatown, you include characters with a wide variety of identities. And so what is or was your process for writing characters with different identities in such thoughtful and respectful ways while still engaging with interesting socio-political critique?
Ooh. Sort of like Bao's last question, I guess. To be honest, I felt a lot of anxiety about whether or not I could write from different points of view other than my own. Not that I wasn't allowed to, just like, how convincingly can I do this? How deep do I want to go? I had a sort of get out of jail free card, which is, if anyone thinks it's bad writing, then I can just say that was intentionally bad. But or that I'm sort of, and some of that, to some degree, it's true. I was intentionally trying to write a kind of by the numbers cop procedural. And so any flattening of a character, I could say, well, it's a TV character. How rich can it be? But that said, I knew that I would still at least have to, for the characters that were important to the story, and not just sort of like, passing by, that you could, and more part of the atmosphere. But for any characters that were going to have real life in the story, and this was a place where my agent and editor really had to help me, was to give, really detailed notes about it and say, you're not doing enough with this character. This character needs more of an emotional journey. That was really eye-opening for me, because I had my eye laser focused on Willis and his family, his parents, the Asians, the old Asian people. And they were saying, no, all of you're writing about a black cop, a white cop, you're writing from the perspective of a little girl. Like, you have to give all of them an inner life. I don't think I answered the question so much as I just kind of restated the question, but I think the answer really is, I tried my best, and I learned a lot.
Cool. I actually do have one more quick question from me, if I can just ask that quick.
No,
I'm wondering, I'm wondering how you deal with the pressure to write like to the Asian American experience, or with the kind of social pressure of writing, knowing that there is the significance of representation in books, arts, culture, and media in mind. Do you feel like that ever creatively stymies you, or is it a motivator, or a little of both?
A little of both. Like, I wouldn't want to get high on, sort of my own press, in that I definitely never sat down thinking, wow, I'm speaking for anyone other than myself. With that said, it's the thing that I derive both gratification from and motivation from, is the idea that I'm in conversation with people, and people might actually be listening, so I better take it seriously what I'm saying, so to me, the appropriate amount of pressure is as if I were at a, pretty large book club, like I should take everyone in the room seriously, including myself, and have, but never believe that I'm speaking for some large segment of people, only that my point of view might be interesting to, that audience.
Thanks so much. I think I'll let Bao close us out here, but thanks everyone who sent in questions. This was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Leave it up to Yang Dog, Yang Deezy to close us out with a great question. Thank you so much, Charles. You're brilliant. I'm a big fan. I'm glad to meet you virtually. Thank you for doing this with us today. We really appreciate it. For those of you at home who haven't already, definitely check out his novel, Interior Chinatown, as well as this book, which is, and also you have your third book, which is fourth grade superstar, third grade?
There's Third Class Superhero and Sorry, Please, Thank You, which are story collections.
Right. Yes, please. Thank you. Everybody, please get those books. We would encourage you to use the link on the page, which you see right now, to Majors and Quinn. Definitely get books from them. We'd like to thank our event sponsors, St. Catherine University, Star Tribune, and our partner, MSP Film Society. This event has been free, and if you've missed part of it or you're coming in late, it will be recorded so you can watch the whole thing. Do feel free to send the link to folks who may be interested. This event was free, but you can always donate to the Loft. As you can imagine, many organizations like us, we're looking at challenging times ahead. So donate, because I personally enjoy having a job and I like to eat and drink things when necessary. And perhaps more importantly, we want to continue working to offer quality literary arts programming to all of you, pandemic or no pandemic. So if you have the means, please do donate. And we encourage people to check out further Loft Wordplay.org events. That was my alarm to say that we went on too long. I encourage you all to check out the loftwordplay.org site for future programming. We have some tremendous stuff happening online. Thank you all for spending a Thursday with us. Thanks to working behind the scenes. I could see your Brady Bunch faces in the square of making this tech thing possible. And of course, huge thank you to Charles. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all. Thanks so much. I enjoyed it. Thanks for all the questions and for the people that tuned in, and thanks to the Loft and the sponsors and you, Bao. Thanks. Had a great time.